You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Cannon Fodder.
Grab your bookmarks, it's time to take cover as we unleash the Cannon Fodder over the Star Wars galaxy of literature. Cannon Fodder is the home of Fantha Tracks Radio for everything Star Wars literature, from comics, books, magazines, partworks, and everything else that comprises the expanded universe. Joining me, Brian Cameron, this month is Mark Newbold and Matt Booker. Morning, guys. Or even
morning. No, it's always good morning on Tatooine, Brian.
Yeah. Well, plug for our Fantha Tracks TV show there. What have you guys been up to since the last time we spoke?
Go for it,
You're
Matt.
first, Newbold.
I know, but I'm letting you go first this time. I'm being nice.
No, because I'm waiting for you. You go first.
Oh, wow. Getting through Christmas, eating too many pies, drinking a whole bottle of sherry. It's been good.
Sherry?
It's sherry.
Dear
I
Lord,
did
are you 90 or something?
I feel like it at the moment. It was a good Christmas. I love sherry. And 2020 was a good year. Lots to read and lots to see and do, as you say to young children.
2020 was a pile of bantha poodoo. Bantha poodoo even.
Yeah.
And we stood in it all year long. What have I been up to since we last spoke? Worked a lot in November and December. And now I am doing nothing. It's brilliant. Because we're back in lockdown in Britain. So, yeah, the shop's closed. It's only click and collect orders. And people can't read signs that say you're closed and don't get it. But they'll get it soon enough, I'm sure.
On this month's show...
Hang on. What have you been up to, Brian?
Yes, what have you been doing, Brian? Come on.
What have you been doing, Brian? Tell us what you've been doing, Brian.
I've been doing nothing. Nothing but work. The last quarter of the year for me is the worst in terms of work. So it's just all been work, I'm afraid. No fun and excitement. Who has had
no cake?
Excitement recently?
No cake and no whiskey?
Yeah, that's it.
Shortbread and whiskey was Christmas, was it?
I had a very quiet Christmas, just myself. Couldn't meet up with family and friends because of all the COVID rules. So I had just a copious amount of vodka.
Same with me and gin then.
Yeah. Obviously, at the moment, all the discussion is on the High Republic, which has just launched. But to give all you guys out there a chance to enjoy the content, we're going to avoid all that this month. And we're going to instead look back at the wonderful year that was 2020 and all the wonderful things that happened and all the wonderful things that we did. Which is pretty much limited to reading comics and books because nobody could go anywhere or do anything.
Well, I went to New York and covered Toy Fair, and then we met up, the three of us, and we watched that last Star Wars film at the cinema together, didn't we?
Yeah.
And then the world fell apart.
Imagine that was the way that it all ended.
I think that was the last film I saw at the cinema, possibly, as well.
That feels like a long time ago.
It definitely was for me. I think I was in the New York area just as New York went into the very first lockdown, and I escaped by about, I think, 48 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, you sneaked right out there, didn't you? I left New York and you sort of went into New York.
I never actually, beyond the airport, never ventured into New York. I headed up to Connecticut. And so I kind of circumvented the problems that were happening there and got in and out of the country quickly. And but yeah, couldn't imagine the way things would have panned out back then.
No.
As I said, we all had great comics and books to read over the past year. And when we were all stuck at home, that was kind of one thing that we're all able to do. So on this month's show, we're going to focus on 2020. And with that in mind, let's get stuck in and chew over the latest Cannon Fodder. So the first publication from 2020 that gets on our selection of the best of the year, Mark, falls to you, and it's the comic book series Bounty Hunters.
It is. I'm really enjoying this series. It's got a real 90s vibe. It just very much throws me back to that sort of Dark Horse era when they were releasing the Jabba comics and the Boba Fett comics, and it's just got that Shadows of the Empire sort of feel about it. I just think Ethan Sachs has really kind of nailed the feel of those characters, because they live in such a world where it's cutthroat and rough and tumble, not that much respect. It's more caution than respect, I think, with those characters. And they've picked Valance as the sort of the lead character to run us through the era, which initially kind of almost felt like a bit of a deep cut. I mean, he's always been on the periphery for people who read the old Marvel run back in the 70s. And it was kind of cool. We had Walt Simonson on recently on Cannon Fodder, and he was partially involved in the creation of Valance. So it's been neat to see him come back, and you kind of expect Fett to be the lead character because he's always signed up sort of the primary bounty hunter, but of course they've got other plans for that guy. So it's just been I've just enjoyed this series immensely. I've not read an issue yet that I've not got a big kick out of so far. It's been a lot of fun.
Did you expect Valance as a character to work? Because in this year, because I'm thinking of, he's very much Terminator-like. And the last couple of Terminator films has kind of flopped, and you kind of think, is that a franchise that's kind of more or less dead now? Although I loved the last one with Emilia Clarke. I think it was a brilliant Terminator film, regardless of what anyone says. And
that wasn't the last one. There's been one since that.
What was the one since
Oh, that's right, yeah. Dark Fate. Was it Dark Fate? Was it?
I think so, yeah.
I can't even think of that one.
Hispanic Terminator, I think it was.
The guy from Doctor Who.
No,
that's the one. No, that's the one before that, isn't it? Isn't that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely the last one flopped because I never.
And that was good as well. That was a good one.
That was Arnie the Carpet Salesman, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
No, it's a good point. I mean, like I say, Valance has got that Terminator vibe about him. Completely got that about him. But I think the difference between...
Well, he looks that way, but he doesn't act the way of a Terminator.
Exactly, and that's the twist. That's the twist, isn't it? You look at the Terminator, and it's a machine wrapped in the skin of a human, whereas Valance is kind of 50-50, and the man
he's
is very
augmented,
much in
isn't
control. He? Exactly, and so there's a lot of pathos, I think, with Valance, which makes it quite interesting to read and especially as you continue to. And it's always a problem with villains. You know, you can over-egg their sad past. I mean, we've just been watching Cobra Kai, and Kreese, the tutor of Johnny Lawrence. You know, he now gets a bit more definition on his backstory. So now he's starting to get a little bit of sympathy because you understand why he's the way he is. And there's always a.
Have you got to the end? Have you?
Yeah, got to the end and absolutely loved it. But there's always a risk of sometimes over-explaining why the bad guy is the bad guy when you don't need that sometimes. You just want him to be the bad guy. But Valance definitely isn't a bad guy, and he's doing certain things for his own ends because he's a bounty hunter. A bit like Mando in that sense. But then his conscience gets tweaked. If he has an obligation in the Bounty Hunters comic, a lot of what he's doing is to stop a war between two warring clans. But also he's motivated by his lost love. The girl that he left behind. So there's lots of things that are actually sort of pushing him on to do the things that he does, and to have him be like the Terminator character because he doesn't give up. He is very much like Arnie in that respect. It's like he keeps getting knocked down and bashed down and broken down and hit and everything. He always seems to find he's got a laser in his elbow, or he's got some weapon somewhere. He'll figure a way to get out of it. I just think it's been a lot of fun, and it could be mega cliched if they wanted to make it overly cliched, and they've just about avoided that. They've just stepped on the right side of that line.
I think the book's got a lot better. It started out a bit messy, and there was too many stories going on in it, and you couldn't follow it in the early issues. And it has picked up a bit better. Yeah,
I agree with that. I mean, I think it was trying to lay its stall out, and it probably laid too many things out initially. But I like the movement. It moves around. It's a storyline that, you feel like you're seeing a lot of the galaxy, and they're bouncing around, and You know, they've had a lot of guest appearances. You know, I was saying this to Mark Mulcaster on Making Tracks not that long ago. You know, it reminds me a little bit of back in the day when, you know, you'd have an Uncanny X-Men and then this issue, Sabretooth. You know, you'd have a big villain or a big guest character turn up in a comic, which was a massive deal back in the day. Not so much now, but it's kind of got that feel about it in a good way. So Fett turns up and just causes chaos and disappears. Bosk is a problem over a few issues. Lately, it's been, here's a bugbear, 4LOM. I'm sorry, it's 4LOM. If it was 4LOM, it'd be L.O.M. wouldn't it? It's not, it's 4LOM. It's 4LOM, not 4LOM. Forget that one. So, you know, but anyway, 4LOM and Zucker's turn up and you've got them, and you've managed to delve into their characters a little bit, which has been kind of cool to see as well. In addition to stuff we've had over the years, it's just investigating the bounty hunters really neatly, and I'm really digging it.
I'm not a fan of droids. Cyborg,
Really? Really?
Cyborgs, I might give a pass to. Although I still have this issue, and it applies to bounty hunter droids as well, is they've got to have someone behind them controlling them to some degree. And I always think, like, the cyborg kind of character of Valance, there's got to be someone that's got some degree of power over them. And that was never explored in the Marvel era, the original Marvel era, and it hasn't been explored yet in this one. And that's one thing I would like to see explored, is you've got to lose part of your own self-control if you're part droid.
Yeah, and I wonder where they're going to take it, because it feels like he's, you know, in that original run, the classic shot of him pulling the half his face off to reveal that he was the cyborg. You know, that was the big takeaway from the original run. Yeah. And this time they've gone into more detail of how he got bashed up and what's been replaced. And, you know, you do know
Target
this.
made, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, and he's probably like 2/3 machine sort of thing. And there's obviously the parallels to Vader.
The one part of the comic series that Bounty Hunters that I loved was the artwork. I thought the environments were incredibly rich. The characters were beautifully detailed. It was really the colouring of it that I thought really stood out. They were bright, vibrant comics.
Yeah, they're gorgeous to look at. The covers have been engaging. The artwork is particularly good, and they've stuck with, is it Paolo Villanelli? I think they've stuck with the same artist for the whole run.
That's always a help, isn't it?
Yeah, it always helps. It totally helps. The colouring has been lush. Marvel do a pretty good job of the colouring these days anyway. The techniques that they use. But it's an attractive comic. I've got to say, it's one I look forward to picking up. Marvel are pretty much hitting on all cylinders. Well, not all cylinders, but they're pretty high level across the board at the moment for all the titles, I think.
Well, a lot of Bounty Hunters have reprints as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. One thing, just on that point, I'm glad you brought that up, Matt. One thing I don't like now about reprints is that they're doing different covers on the reprints, and that really bugs me. I much preferred when they recolored them, like with Star Wars issue 1 and Vader issue 1, the original Vader issue 1, because it was clearly the same comic, but just tweaked to delineate this is first or second or third.
Yeah, but all they're doing is just picking a splash page inside and just slapping that on the cover.
But it becomes it's a variant then. It's not a reprint. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? It just, I don't like that.
No, I completely get it.
It's just a bugbear of mine.
But they started doing that. They've not been doing that. They've been doing it for a couple of years now, because we had the the different eras we had with one-shot character ones, and there was the Boba Fett one.
Age of Rebellion.
Oh, yeah.
Riding the Space Pony.
Age of the Republic.
Yeah, and the variant on that was the internal page of him riding Space Pony and stuff.
That's right.
The reprint on that. Yeah. So they've been doing it for a little while.
Yeah. But I'm glad it's successful enough to get to reprint levels, you know, and I think the market for it will probably only actually expand now that you've got Book of Boba Fett coming, Mando Season 3. You know, we're very much in that world all the time, you know, so I think it's going to attract more people. So,
well, the last reprinted of issue 1 was a Fett cover, so I ordered like 10 copies and stuck them on the shelf.
Right.
People go, Boba Fett comic. Yeah, it's Boba Fett comics. Boba Fett comics. So he's barely in it. So they pick it up because it's got a Fett cover on it.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of ongoings at the moment. There's the Star Wars series, Darth Vader, Dr. Aphra, Bounty Hunters. There's now the High Republic. Then there's the threat of a Mandalorian series that was supposed to be announced as part of Mando Mondays, but wasn't. They didn't announce any literature stuff in the end.
Nah.
And across the IDW, they've got Star Wars Adventures and now Star Wars Adventures High Republic ongoings. So there's a stack of ongoings there. Can they all survive? And could Bounty Hunters be a victim if one goes?
I guess you'd look at that as being one of the potential targets because Vader's a perennial seller. Yeah, I'd say Aphra off the top of my head, but I think because it's a female-led comic, it's Marvel's unique Star Wars character as well. It's the one character they've really contributed to the whole thing. I think that's and also the hardback of the audiobooks coming out. So there's feels like the Gentle Giant have just done the figure, and obviously Hasbro have done the 6-inch and 3 3/4. So it feels like there's a sort of a mini push for Aphra. I guess Bounty Hunters would be the easiest one to can if they did. IDW.
Well, you can finish the storyline, can't you?
You certainly could, and I think Ethan Sachs has proved that he's really got
has got an ongoing storyline that he could end up. You see?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And also, he's a character that could cross over into other stories anyway, isn't he? You know, you could see him turn up in other stuff. But I say Ethan Sachs has proved he really gets these characters, and I would expect him to turn up somewhere else if Bounty Hunters didn't prosper. But I really hope it does. I'm enjoying it. But it's a great point that there is a hell of a lot of ongoing stuff, which kind of precludes them doing miniseries. You know, we never got the Rise of Skywalker adaptation. I don't know if that's ever going to turn into a trade.
And everything else got pushed back, you see, because when was High Republic meant to launch originally?
August, just before Celebration.
Yeah. That's the one we've got is a lot of stuff being pushed back. A lot of issues of core books. We had nothing printed for 3 or 4 months last year, see?
That's true.
Is it 3 months near enough, I think?
At least.
I don't know, it's all a blur.
March through June.
Yeah. So all those books should be, you know, that's why High Republic got pushed back and everything's been pushed back. But there's other projects they've been working on that are now coming to fruition. They've got to publish. So I think that's where you're going to get a bit of a cluster of stuff together and then it'll all spread out again.
I'm Anthony Daniels and you are listening to Fantha Tracks. Well done.
Another one of the major ongoings from Marvel this year was Darth Vader, which returned again with another new ongoing. Matt, it's your pick of the year. Why did you pick that comic?
Just because it's so damn good. Like, I enjoyed the post-New Hope Vader comic. I enjoyed the post-Sith Vader comic. But this post-Empire one is just fantastic. It's more Vader than the other ones have been. Him going and searching for what happened to Padme. I don't know why that's happened post-Empire, but fine, it has. He should have done that sooner, really, I'd have thought. But it's happened now. And it was a really good story arc, and it brought back characters from Naboo, which we've not seen explored in a long, long time. And then he let them go. And he went back to his master, and his master wasn't very happy. So it's just a really, really... I mean, the issue when he went back to Palpatine just blew me away. What did you guys think of it when that issue came out? Was it 5 or 6, I think?
5, I think. It wasn't. No, I think 6, wasn't it? No,
5 or 6,
was 6.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, a paid off Palpatine is always interesting to see anyway. But
yeah,
I mean, obviously Vader was mega conflicted, wasn't he? Because he's kind of stepped back into his past. It's a good point, actually, that it's a weird time to pick that storyline after Empire. But then I suppose his encounter with Luke is going to make him reassess, you know, Anakin to a degree. Because like Ben said, you know, he's kind of more machine than man, and he's sort of switched off to his past. But that whole thing with Luke has really rocked him. I mean, Greg Pak said that, didn't he? You know, this has made him reassess everything.
But so that was out of the entire year, that was my most striking issue of a comic in quite a few years, to be honest. You know, the Kylo Ren book was really, really good as well.
Yes.
And that's sort of a must-read for anybody who's not picked it up, is the Kylo Ren one, and then this new Vader are complete must-reads of Star Wars canon, you know, expanding the the characters we know from the films.
But it's clever, isn't it, to pick Vader at that point of time after what happened at Bespin. You know, obviously it rocks Luke, and you see that in the Star Wars title. You know, it almost makes him angry. He's questioning things. But Vader also, because he's suppressed so much, you know, it's the flip side. You know, we just talked about Valance being half machine and everything, and Vader's the same, but in a different way, because Vader's more machine than man because he's lost his limbs. You know, it's not, you know, everything else from the head down is still him, you know, but the arms and the legs aren't. So that's the machine part of Vader, and lungs and scarring and his lots of internal stuff and such. But for him to go through what he went through at best, because it was as much an ordeal for him in a way as it was for Luke, you know, different, but you know, to identify that as something to delve into in a comic kind of feels like it's the sort of thing Matt Stover would have knocked out the park as a novel. You know, like the Revenge of the Sith novel, when you're inside their heads. Yeah. I'd love him to write a book about Vader after Empire, because he would have really got into the psyche of the character. It's a good thing to explore. And like I say, go back to Naboo. I love Naboo. I wish we see more of it. I'm hoping we see it in Mandalorian at some point. You know, it's one of those planets I want to go back to. So, you know, anything like that. You know, and they marketed it well as well, because those covers, we know it wasn't Padme, it was one of the handmaidens, but they were totally painting Natalie Portman on the covers, you know. So, you know, it's.
But he had double take as well, you know.
Yeah. Totally. I really enjoyed it, yeah.
Yeah.
There was one part of it, I guess, that I didn't buy into, was the whole Amidalian kind of element. Once they left Naboo and they went to the sort of the medical world, and I didn't see why they followed them there. I kind of felt like it should have ended at Naboo.
Yeah.
Was it Polis Pass, Sam?
I was feeling a little bit clumsy at that point. And it just felt like there was one scene too many. But that was my only sort of downward side of it. I agreed. I loved going back and seeing all the Naboo environments, introducing some of the characters from the films. I thought that was all handled really nicely.
Yeah.
And the only disappointing element was that they didn't spend more time at it. You know, I guess my one criticism of it, and it's a good criticism, is they were introducing them, going to Tatooine, going to Naboo, and all these things. They didn't spend enough time in those environments.
Yeah.
I would have dragged it out over more issues. You know, there was more of a story to tell there.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting as well, isn't it? You know, you've just had the two E.K. Johnston books about Padme, so people are interested in the location as well as the character and her setup with the handmaidens, which is kind of what they go back to in Vader. The Amidala thing, I mean, you know, I get that she was the sort of she was the Leia of her era, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Padme? You know, so you can understand that there would be a dedication to her, but also on the flip side, she's been dead for 23 years or however long it is, 24 years.
Yeah, the dedication just be a statue in the grounds, and that's it. Maybe a painting here and there.
Yeah.
You know, a memorial fountain in the gardens or something.
Yeah, which kind of almost the walkthrough that you saw at the end of Sith with the funeral, that sort of somewhere like that. But yeah, that didn't quite sit right. But nevertheless, it is what it is.
Or an airport or hospital named after or something. But yeah.
Oh, we all want a hospital named after us.
You wouldn't focus on Padme though when the glorious leader of the Empire is your former senator of Naboo, Mr. Palpatine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, that sometimes gets overlooked, doesn't it? It's like,
and one of your handmaidens went off to go on the high seas with Johnny Depp and Captain Jack.
Was democratically elected and awarded all the powers that he used by the Senate.
Yeah.
Not a single thing he did was criminal.
No.
Basically, the rebellion were terrorists.
Oh, completely. The old certain point of view thing, you could definitely look at it like that. He was so clever the way he got himself into that position, but it makes you wonder. You know, Naboo. It didn't exist when they made the original trilogy, and they can wreck on the fact that a lot of people would look at Naboo and it would almost be like a pariah planet, wouldn't it? Look at all the rebellion came from there, and the Empire came from there, from one world in the Midrim. You know.
Yeah.
I think it would have more standing, whichever way you look at it.
Yeah, get in your time traveling space lanes with Ezra and go and wipe the place out.
But I suppose if you look at that cutscene from Revenge of the Sith, when they basically form the Rebel Alliance, before the Empire has actually been declared, you think there's been a rebellion before there was an Empire. If you want to look at it in that order, because they kind of know what's coming, you know. But again, all of that, it's Padme that's kind of very much on the forefront of that with Bail and with Mothma and a few other characters. It's definitely Naboo's a key world, and I really want to see more of it. So, I agree with Matt. I think Vader's really picked up on that nicely. I'm hoping there's more of that sort of stuff to come. But as a title, Greg Pak's really found that voice well, because Vader's another bit like Han Solo. It's a very easy one to get wrong.
I just think Vader's just been, you know, any customer comes to the shop and says to me, "Oh, I want to read something new," I've been handing them the Vader graphic novel and the Kylo Ren one. And I think those two are the standout must-reads of the year. If you're not going to read all the comics, they are ones you really should be reading. So there are our favourite picks, Brian. What's your favourite pick of the year?
So my favourite pick of the year was Paul Duncan's Archives book based on the prequel trilogy. Beautiful, massive, heavy, in-depth look at one of the most underrated eras of Star Wars. The prequels, interesting time, because this was the first time really in all seriousness that Star Wars came back after Return of the Jedi. You know, they dabbled a little bit with the special editions. They tried a little bit with publishing and comics. But this was really George Lucas putting his money where his mouth was and saying, right, I'm going to try and fund these things myself and make the complete story that I've always wanted to tell. And just going back to that era, hearing some of the stories, because back then there wasn't this shyness that Disney have in terms of letting us know what's going on in terms of the making of these films. There was loads of content came out on behind the scenes of the prequels, like unbelievable access that you just don't get on any production now. And but still, there's so much wealth of information in there, and it's interesting hearing George's perspective on things now. And I guess 2019 was probably when he was interviewed for it, and him reflecting back, because obviously things became a little bit nasty and horrible for him. A lot of pretty despicable things said towards him about the prequels, and it was interesting to see his take in the modern time on it.
Does he touch on that? Does that get mentioned at all?
Not really. That's kind of he kind of throws out the usual kind of comments that he's always made about his consciousness of the negative reaction to it, but his determination to tell the story that he wanted to tell.
Yeah.
But
and it was
still,
for kids.
It's still in the back of my mind that that impacted him. You know, that backlash impacted him in terms of his filmmaking career and what he chose to do, and ultimately the fact that he chose to sell Star Wars. And there's still been so many cut-in comments from him over the time. And I always remember, I think it was TMZ that kind of interviewed him as he was getting into his car, and they asked him a question, and he made the comment that nobody wants him to see him make a Star Wars film anymore. And that still bugs me deeply to this day. Because if anyone was to tell a Star Wars story, I would want it to be George Lucas.
Yep.
Yeah.
And anyone who deserved to have the right to do that was George Lucas. And I think the way that some of the language that people used, you can dislike a film and dislike a film passionately. I hated the sequel trilogy. I've got no issues with the abilities or talents of any of the people who created the film, and I've got no qualms about their intent to make something enjoyable and their belief that they made something enjoyable, certainly that they like. I don't hate on them, you know.
No.
George suffered hate.
But then, What's your sense then of how does the book come across? That's what I'm trying to say. Because obviously you've had the original trilogy, which was completely what it was, the legendary trilogy, and then they're not trying to catch lightning in the bottle because George said he didn't want to just remake the same 3 films. What's your sense of what their task ahead was when they went into it?
It's a difficult one because obviously they're reflecting back rather than looking forward, because it's mostly reflective interviews rather than necessarily interviews in that time period.
Right.
And I would say that in all the interviews, there's this level of discomfort and angst, and I'm not going to say regret, but they all put their heart and soul into it, and the levels of quality and the ground that they were breaking in these films goes unrecognised, I think.
Yeah,
agreed. Yeah,
they a lot of crafting went on, a lot of behind the scenes work. It wasn't just right, we're going to make a film next year. They worked on it for years before they put a camera in a roll, a film on a camera or whatever.
Very much like 1976 again, where George had written a script and ILM were sitting there saying, right, okay, how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
And they were having to create ways on how to do this. And I know people talk a lot about Jurassic Park and that being a factor, and okay, now we can make the prequels. But still, so much of when they started the process of making the prequels, they didn't know how they were going to do things.
Yeah.
One of the interesting segments I spoke at length about was Jar Jar and the creation of Jar Jar and how they spent hundreds of thousands on various suits and things to do it in a physical way, and they ended up going the CGI way. So, all this criticism about digital characters and all that, it wasn't a clear decision, right, we're going to make this character and he's going to be a digital character. They experimented with all different ways on how to do it. There wasn't this cult of everything must be CGI that people like to give this impression of. There was, I think it's been proven as well. People have spoken about the sheer amount of practical effects and miniatures and models and all that in the prequels as well. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good.
Seeing so many of them in detail in the book as well, and I think we've all had the privilege of seeing quite a lot of them on display as well. At what was the name of the tour that happened in London?
Identities.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And seeing the amazing detail of some of these models and that as well in person. So.
Yeah, I managed to get to the Star Wars in costume event in New York a few years ago, and you saw a lot of the Trish Biggers clothes up close, and like the detail and them was insane.
Did you go when you went to Toy Fair?
It was Toy Fair, yeah. It was at the old New York Times offices. I think it was on 42nd Street, if I remember. But it was this beautiful old building. And like I say, the craft and detail was insane. Yeah, it's a good point. It's well known, isn't it? They made more practical models on Phantom Menace than the whole of the original trilogy combined. And you look at the films now, where people like Neil Scanlon have got the tech, motors have miniaturized and materials have got slimmer and thinner and lighter, so they can build practical aliens. They just couldn't do it then. You look at the sequel trilogy and everything that Disney has done, I don't think they've broken anywhere near as much ground and broken new boundaries and invented new things. Whereas the prequel trilogy, they invented it all from scratch near enough, didn't they? Oh, digital battle art, CG characters.
Yeah.
I mean, let's take 18 of Ewan and take 14 of Liam and put them together and make it work. Stuff like that. Yeah. It was insane.
If you bring it right up to date and you look at The Mandalorian, it's almost like Lucasfilm back to what it originally was. And this whole concept, right, we want to make a TV series. How are we going to do it?
Yeah.
And George had that problem, and George tried to tackle it for a long, long time, and they made huge ground. And I think was it this year there was some footage leaked of.
It was last year. Yeah, that's right.
It was last year. It was only a couple of minutes, but it was fantastic, wasn't it?
2020 footage of
Underworld,
yeah, and even what they were attempting then, you can see the evolution and the direction they've been trying to get to. And, with the whole volume or whatever you want to call it, people use different names for it, stagecraft. They've gotten to that point where they can achieve some of these things. And you watch some of the episodes of The Mandalorian, and there's scenes there where it definitely doesn't work. And it really stands out, and it's a little bit awkward.
And then other ones, you can't spot it at all.
You literally can't see it. They're achieving things on TV that even a few years ago would have been ridiculous budget in film.
Yeah.
And
which, like you say, that's Lucas's dream, isn't it?
Yeah, I take the scene with the Krayt Dragon as a perfect example of that, traveling through the sand in the village there. And that's ridiculous levels of technology needed to achieve that. And you've got the speeder bike moving in and the camera's moving, and it's a live animated set in the background. It is just ridiculous. And yes, you can pick out some of the houses don't quite look right.
But this is the thing is, the first season of Mando, you didn't know how they did it, really.
No.
It wasn't really explained in the first season how they'd made it until you watch the making of.
Yeah.
That's right.
And once the trick's been revealed by Penn and Teller, you'll then look for it every time.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
But if you go 10 years down the road with this tech, we've gone 20 years down the road with the tech they invented in Phantom Menace, you don't even notice it anymore. But the tech they invented then is used in so many other things nowadays. And the tech they're doing with Mando will be used in so many other projects from now on.
And when you're looking at the prequel archives book, and there's so much of that same development going on then to achieve the trilogy. And they talk about the sequels there as well, in terms of doing work on that was almost like their test ground for things for the prequels, and could it be done and how could it be done. They even the look ahead a little bit. There's some comments in there from Lucas on what direction he would have went next if he'd carried on and completed the sequel trilogy, because obviously he started that when he brought in Kathy Kennedy, and he brought in writers to work with him to develop a treatment that ultimately his treatment was what sold Lucasfilm to Disney.
Yeah. Because
Disney were looking to make a new Star Wars trilogy, and that's why they bought the company. And yes, they ended up going in a different direction. But it's interesting to see just the little elements that they reveal there and from the direction that Lucas would have went.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
So do you remember we had the Star Wars comic Dark Horse years ago, based on the first draft of New Hope, the first draft of Star Wars? Do you think in 20 years we'll get a George Lucas sequel trilogy comic?
No. And purely because a corporation like Disney would not have the comfort level to reveal that alternative.
Such a shame.
Yeah.
I think Lucasfilm would have done that.
Yeah, again, because it's independent and it's art, and George would have thought of it as this would make a great project. Let's see what people would have done with my original script. He would have seen it in that direction, where Disney would see it as, well, we don't want people to have a negative thought or have this idea it could have been better if we'd done it differently. And
or have the story that they could make a fan film better than the sequels.
And that was another thing. Obviously, another highlight of 2020, something to read, was Colin Trevorrow's script.
Yes.
Very rare occasion that you actually get to read an unmade script of a film. And it was interesting to see the pluses and minuses from his script compared to what they actually decided to go with.
Yeah.
That kind of element is why Disney would never allow a making of these new sets of films.
Who leaked his script, though? Do we know?
Wasn't him. Personally, if you were to take my take on it, disgruntled person on the production.
Yeah. Makes the most sense.
Because not happy with fan reaction and probably thought we had something better that we could have made and we chose not to. That's kind of my take on it.
And do you think it was better?
Not many people would have had that script, I don't imagine. But enough people that it was in the hands of Disney Imagineering in order to make some elements for Galaxy's Edge.
Galaxy's Edge, yeah, that's right.
Distributed wide enough that enough people had seen it.
And would you rather have seen that script, Brian?
I would have rather have seen Colin Trevorrow make the film. I'm not necessarily agree with everything that's in that script, but I would have rather seen his film.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I agree with that. I'd either rather JJ done all three, or Trevorrow got to do a third one and mix the trilogy directors up like the OT.
Or at the very least have all three writers of the three films sit in the same room and work together.
Yeah.
I think that's my biggest... People for the last few months have come in the shop discussing with me Star Wars about how good Mando is. And my biggest take is from speaking with people is Mando is so much better because you've got two people. Yes, different people have written different episodes and stuff, but you've had Favreau and Filoni overseeing the entire thing and crafting a complete story. And the problem with the sequels was you had a disjointed bunch of people doing different things at different angles. And I'm sure when they started out making Force Awakens, they didn't know where they're going to end. And there wasn't, George plotted out the original trilogy, the sequel trilogy, and the prequel trilogy back in the 70s very, very loosely. And that's what the new ones have missed, really, is that they didn't plot it out in advance, a beginning, middle, and end. Yes, you fill in the bits in between, but they didn't plot out a beginning, middle, and end very well.
I would like to think that the executives at Lucasfilm will have learnt a lot from making television, because Lucasfilm's never really been involved in making television previously. And
Caravan of Courage, Battle for Endor.
I'm pushing aside
Droids cartoon. What do you say, Mr. Cameron?
Pushing aside animation. Let's talk live action episodic TV. I've been
Battle for Endor and Caravan of Courage.
I've been involved in a lot of TV productions and then a few films, a couple that have done rather well. And
rather.
And there's a different mindset completely to making TV than there is to film.
Yes.
And if you can transfer the skills from TV to film, you understand a lot more about how much connected you need to be in terms of storyline, because that script needs to be locked in because you're working on 3 or 4 episodes at the same time.
Yeah.
Because, you have to be that far ahead to make it work. And it just makes me think that the complete disconnect in terms of the sequel trilogy, in terms of how they made it, and every film was its own thing. It was trying to be its own trilogy. Each film was trying to be its own trilogy, and it just didn't. I think as much as people will enjoy it, I think everyone has to generally accept that as an arc, a 3-film arc, it wasn't as strong as it could have been. At the very mildest of criticism. And episodic TV can't be like that. You've got to be on top of the ball all the time. You've got to know what's coming next. You're juggling so many balls at the same time. And I would like to think the executives of Lucasfilm will have learnt a lot from that. And they won't make the same mistakes going forward in terms of where they go in terms of film.
I think Disney just pushed them too quickly to make a film.
Yeah.
There is that. I think anytime now you're involved and you're owned by a studio, you're going to get a date, and it's a case of you're going to hit that date, and there's not a no to it. That's your date, because it's all about getting that income and that profits on that quarter's financial statement to appease your shareholders.
Yeah.
You can't miss those dates anymore.
No.
And you just look at the mess that some of the companies are in because of the whole 2020 COVID and films being moved around the schedule and them trying to fit films back in for next year. It's not just a case of trying to get films to fit the schedule for a cinema release. It's trying to balance the income so that their profits are hitting the right quarters they need to. Those statements. There's so much business behind these decisions. It's not just creative.
And George never did that. George would go and release a load of books and a load of novels and a load of other stuff, and a load more action figures to make the money to make the films.
When you're an independent company and you've got one person at the top, it's yes or no, you know?
Yeah.
You're not answering as shareholders. You're not a board having to appease your shareholders.
No.
And I guess what I'm kind of reaching for here is that Marvel have built up this idea of developing things. They call it phases, don't they? They call it phases.
Yeah, phases.
Yeah.
And Lucasfilm need to start operating in that same kind of manner, where they've got a consistent storyline mapped out for a number of years in terms of their studio film releases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to be churning out films as quick as that, the left hand needs to know what the right's doing.
Yeah, and you need longer between films as well.
Yeah. And
because they were already filming episode 8 before 7 was even out.
Yeah. And it's the same, you know, Trevorrow's script's done and dusted before filming's finished on 8. You know, so
yeah.
If things are gonna be fluid.
Who was it who said, wasn't it Johnson said he was writing the script for episode 8 before we'd even seen 7 fully?
Yes.
That just don't make any sense.
And that's why you've got to have this connected creative process.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if that's one thing, it's the archive book will teach you as to how much love and attention went into the prequels, and how much of the original treatments and the original ideas from 1976 still featured in the prequels as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Character names and everything, you know. But the thing is that it was one man's vision.
Yes.
To tell the story that's been in his head that he's been reinventing over all the years.
And I think that's the beautiful thing that comes out of the book throughout is, as much as I regret the way that it's ended for George in terms of the criticism and the way he felt afterwards, he got to tell the story like he wanted to tell. And very few filmmakers will get to do that. Especially in the face of the criticism the Phantom Menace got. George still retained all the power as an independent filmmaker who was financing the films himself. He didn't have the pressure of the studio forcing him to change what he was doing. He was able to follow through with what he wanted to do, and that was kind of echoed in some of the comments in the interview, and that he meant that he didn't react to the criticism. He carried on making what he wanted to make. And so
for kids.
For that, I'm happy. And that's all I've got to say about that.
No, it isn't. You can draw breath.
That's all for us for this month's show. We're going to be back in a few weeks' time. We'll be talking everything High Republic, from the kids' books to the novels to the comics. So look out for that.
And the video game.
And the video game. Of course, the video game. Often forgotten about the actual first release for the High Republic. And we might even talk about the Chinese novel set in the High Republic as well. So
once you've read it,
on phantomtracks.com/radio, keep an eye out, get subscribed to the show, and look out for that episode coming very soon.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Making Tracks.